Hey Gemma, I'm looking for a skill. Oh, which one? Ambush? No, you're a human, silly. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, today is going to be a sort of informative discussion more than anything else. I often see people asking about builds for specific weapons, and while builds generally will be a bit different for each weapon, I figured while we are slowly going through and releasing our proper builds for everything one at a time, for now it would probably be a good idea to just sit down with you all and go through what are generally the best armor skills in Monster Hunter Wilds right now, and the best way to actually get them from the armor sets that are currently available. Essentially trying to teach you all how to put together your own ideal armor sets depending on which of the skills you personally prefer or prioritize more. I won't be going over weapons, as I've already talked about the best weapons in a recent video on the channel, and for the most part weapons themselves are fairly particular, but the idea is by the end of this video, regardless of which weapon type you main, you should have the tools and knowledge to put together your ideal set of 5 armor pieces and work out what decorations and talismans to use around them in order to get a ton of extra damage from your weapon. A note that this will of course have spoilers for high rank monsters, as we're talking about the highest value skills and armor in the game, and I will be doing this with a focus on the average player rather than talking about skills that apply more to speedrunning, as that does change things up quite a bit. All that said, I'm going to start by just diving into some of the highest value armor skills in order, talking about things that affect them and what armor pieces you generally want to use for those skills. Starting at what I consider the very tippity top of usefulness, let's talk about the Antivirus skill. This skill at 3 ranks makes it 30% easier to overcome the frenzy virus when you have it, but then also gives you 10% bonus affinity after it is cleared. It says it's 15%, it's not 15%, it's 10%. Generally when getting this you would pair it with the gore magala 2-set bonus as well, which gives you frenzy whenever you come across a large monster. When you cleanse the debuff from frenzy, you get the buff for 90 seconds afterwards. Frenzy itself gives you 15% affinity when cleansed, and it goes up to 25% total when counting the bonus from Antivirus as a skill. So using these two things together is an extremely potent combination for any weapon that cares about affinity or crit chance, which is pretty much everything, with a notable exception that shelling on gunlance, hunting horn sound damage effects, and some ammo types can be affected by affinity as well. So for those weapons or playstyle focuses you don't care about affinity, and we will talk about the thing that you most want for those a bit later on. That said, for nearly all weapons or builds that do care about affinity, that care about crit chance, you'll find them tending to build around Antivirus and the gore magala 2-set. The easiest way to do that generally is with gore magala legs and waist, generally both beta, but the alpha waist is also acceptable if you don't have the decorations to fill out the slots. While we are here, it's worth noting that the gore magala 4-set bonus also just gives you plus 10 raw attack while you are inflicted with the frenzy, and plus 15 raw attack after cleansing the debuff. And generally the best pieces if you want gore magala 4-set are those same waist and legs that I mentioned before, but then also the gore magala beta gloves and gore magala beta helmet as well, leaving the chest piece slot opened. The second priority for a lot of builds and weapons then is going to be maximum might, but this skill has a few caveats to it. It is the most efficient way of gaining 30% affinity in Monster Hunter Wilds. It is a lot of potential value for the cost of 3 skill ranks, and it is a skill that comes as a level 2 decoration at that too, so it's very much able to be fit into a lot of different setups for the value it gives. The problem is that it is semi-conditional. First, it requires you to be using a weapon type that cares about affinity, which does already cut out a few. Second, it requires you to not usually use stamina as a part of your main offense. Things like bow and dual blades have absolutely no chance of keeping the maximum might buff active while playing normally, and so maximum might is bad for those weapons. Greatsword is an example of something a little bit more on the edge, where you use just enough stamina to make the buff inconsistent, but not so much that it's totally worthless either. But then you have fringe cases that can be improved with a little more investment, like hammer, and you can make it a little bit better if you put in a little more effort. Generally speaking though, for the weapons that maximum might is really good for, which is longsword, sword and shield, charge blade, those types of weapons that do constant attacks with low force stamina usage, you can get away with applying maximum might mostly through your armor slot decorations, and it's a very common use of your 2-slot sockets in armor pieces. That said, if you want to be a bit more proactive building around maximum might, and if you want to increase the uptime on the buff itself, especially using some of the more sort of questionable weapons for it, like hammer, which I mentioned earlier, then you want to look into Guardian, Fulgur, and Janath armor. Specifically, the set bonus for this gives you a little bonus stamina bar, and then even the 2-set bonus stamina bar is enough that anything that isn't bow or dual blades can easily play without dropping maximum might. The question is simply whether it's worth the investment of 2 armor pieces to achieve. For hammer, for example, this means that you can use maximum might freely with all of your actual charged attacks, which normally you couldn't because they drain stamina. So if 30% affinity on mighty charged slam is worth that skill investment to you, then it's absolutely worth it. Generally, when doing this, for applying this actual set bonus as well, I use Guardian Fulgur Anjanath Beta helmet and gloves, which also gives a little bit of Agitator along with a touch of maximum might itself. Then third up, we have another affinity skill, Weakness Exploit. The reason that we have so much affinity skills here is generally because crit boost is the single best weapon skill as far as the potential value of it. As a result, building for affinity, which is crit chance on your armor, is a really big deal for increasing your damage overall. And so again, any weapon that isn't hurt for some reason by focusing on affinity tends to be focusing on affinity in the endgame right now. Weakness Exploit as a skill gives you consistent bonus affinity when hitting weak parts of monsters, which is any time that a number is orange when you hit a monster, so you should be doing this anyways to do real damage, as those are the parts you want to hit. Then you get some bonus affinity when hitting a wounded part as well. Usually when calculating how much affinity a build has, I will count the weak point affinity from Weakness Exploit, but not the wound affinity, as wounds are much less consistently active and less controllable. This takes more investment than either Antivirus or Maximum Might for affinity gain, as it is a 5-rank skill, with individual levels being a 3-slot decoration too, but again, for weapons that use affinity well, it is simply still worth the investment for Weakness Exploit, and these 3 skills together put you at 90% consistent affinity if using a base Artian weapon with its 5% affinity bonus. For Weakness Exploit, generally you'll be looking at using either Arkveld or Guardian Arkveld armor pieces for the highest efficiency and the highest use pieces of these sets. When I see people actually putting stuff together for Weakness Exploit as a focus are the Arkveld beta chests, mostly for the 1 Weakness Exploit, 3-slot and 2-slot decoration, which is pretty good, or the Guardian Arkveld beta gauntlets for the 2 Weakness Exploit and 3 1-slot sockets, and which one of the 2 you'd use generally depends on the decorations that you are in need of. And in fact, earlier I mentioned Gore Magala 4 set and the pieces that you'd usually use with that. The finishing touch for that combo is to use Arkveld beta chest for some extra affinity in the slot space. That said, this also makes this the moment to talk about Arkveld and Guardian Arkveld set bonuses as well, and to put it simply, both of them are relatively efficient at giving you bonus health recovery over the course of a fight, but it won't do anything if you're looking for pure offense, obviously, which is most of what this video is about. Moving on then, let's talk about Burst as a skill, and this is the most universally sought after raw attack boosting armor skill, and the reason is the amount of it that it gives. While you have any ranks of Burst, after you hit the monster once, you will gain +5 raw attack for 4 seconds. If you hit the monster again within that 4-second window, the timer will reset. If you get up to 5 attacks without this timer running out, you will get a further bonus to both raw attack and element, which depends on the ranks of the skill that you have. At rank 5, the maximum, you get 18 bonus raw attack, and then the element gain varies per weapon. If you can consistently manage to hit a monster at least once every 4 seconds, you can keep this buff active permanently for an entire hunt. And with the way that it works in Wilds, I would argue that every weapon except for maybe the Greatsword can keep Burst active the majority of a hunt timer, and if you can do that, then Burst is one of the very top skills that you could get, even if you are using a pure raw attack build, because 18 consistent raw attack that you essentially just get passively by hitting the monster, just hunting the monster you normally would, is an incredible amount of gain for very little investment and very little mental space and consideration. It gets even better though if you use elements on your weapons too, because Burst does also boost element, and we were just talking about raw until now. If you are looking for individually efficient burst giving armor pieces, some parts of the new Udra armor set offer burst in pretty reasonable amounts and with some decent slot availability on it too, but for the most part what I would consider to be the best burst armor set is Guardian Ebony Odogaron, especially the alpha gloves and the beta helmet are quite good for this, giving you 4 burst between the 2 pieces. As well, it's worth noting that the Ebony Odogaron armor has a burst related set bonus as well. The 2 set bonus gives you +3 raw attack while the full burst bonus is active, as well as extending the potential active duration to 5 seconds instead of 4 seconds. This gives you a slightly longer window to keep it from dropping off and makes it better for the weapons that are a little bit slower like Greatsword or Hammer. The 4 set bonus bumps that extra raw attack bonus up to +10, so it's then 28 raw attack total while burst is active, and it increases the timing window to 6 seconds before the buff drops off, so it's even longer. Generally speaking, for most weapons the set bonus is a little bit overkill, it limits your other skills a bit too much. The exception to this though are those weapons that get less goodness out of affinity like I mentioned earlier. Your sound effect focused hunting horn, your gunlance especially, or some different ammo types for ranged weapons. If your weapon or your damage type doesn't care much for affinity, then not only is going burst itself really strong, but going full in on Guardian Ebony Odogaron armor is extremely powerful. If you don't want affinity, then Gore set bonus doesn't help you, but getting an easily activatable 28 raw attack is pretty damn solid as a replacement placement. That said, even for the weapon types like greatsword that might not get the full 5-hit bonus effect active consistently, I do heavily recommend considering just one rank of burst anyways, because the first hit bonus of burst doesn't change depending on the actual skill rank. It is always +5 raw attack, which means that when running one rank, every hit after your first hit gains 5 raw. For a weapon like hammer, where mighty charge slam has 2 lead-in hits, big bang has lead-in hits, upswing has lead-in hits before the big damage happens, that first hit bonus will always be active at the very least, so it's always worth thinking about at least one rank of burst if nothing else. Next up, I want to talk about the adrenaline rush skill. This gives you bonus raw attack after you dodge an attack from an enemy with the actual invulnerability frames on the effect, and then the bonus lasts for 30 seconds after you do this. The reason I have this ranked so highly is especially for any weapon that has inbuilt iframe interactions with it. Hammer's charge step evade can activate adrenaline rush, sword and shield's backstep can activate adrenaline rush, dual blade's demon mode dodge attack can activate adrenaline rush, as can longsword's iframe attacks as well. Even just one rank of adrenaline rush is +10 raw attack when activated, which is a ton of value for one rank of a skill, but with full 5 ranks it goes up to 30 bonus raw, which is the highest amount of pure raw that you can get from a single armor skill in itself. For any weapon that can trigger this with actual attacks, that means this is absolutely top tier, arguably even better than burst, as long as you make a point of keeping it active as often as possible. The main reason that I have it ranked below burst on this list is that it applies to less weapons, less playstyles, and is a more conditional bonus, something that you have to actively actually think about getting to proc and happen rather than just something that happens automatically. And especially because if you get knockdowns or you stunlock the monster at all, suddenly there are no attacks for you to dodge and activate this effect. So while the potential of adrenaline rush is higher than burst, it is less consistent, it takes a bit more work, but I still rate it as an extremely high value armor skill regardless, as long as you fill the conditions I've mentioned. For the most part, adrenaline rush is best gotten either through decorations or through your talisman. However, Rathalos armor itself comes with adrenaline rush on it naturally a little bit, and specifically the Rathalos waist is a very solid specific armor piece that has multiple ranks of adrenaline rush baked into it. After that, next up in line, let's talk about Agitator. The value that you get from Agitator as a skill is a bit hard to quantify because it will be different for every player and every monster that you fight. Agitator gives you both affinity and attack when a monster is enraged, and monster enrages are slightly complex with how they work, but to put it simply, when a monster enrages in a fight will depend on a combination of the time that has passed while fighting it and the damage that you have dealt to it. The more damage you are dealing, the faster a monster will enrage, and that counts for every enrage that it does. This is why you'll see a lot of speedrunners clearly prioritizing Agitator as an offensive skill, because when you're hitting every single attack against a monster, when you're scripting the fight so that you actually control the timings, you know what's going to happen, using the best of the best weapons and skills as well, especially with the lower monster health pools in Monster Hunter Wilds, the monsters that you're fighting will be enraged for a large amount of the hunt, and this brings up the value of the skill significantly. When calculating the effect of Agitator for a build, I usually count it as 50% uptime, so I count rank 5 Agitator as being 10 raw attack and 7.5% affinity increase on average across a hunt, but more realistically, for most people, it's probably around 60-70% uptime on a hunt, and for a proper speedrun level hunter, it can be at 80% or even higher than that. And this is why when rating it for the average hunter, I have it down around 6th priority as a skill, but it can be higher depending on the situation. That said, Agitator comes the nicest on either Guardian Fulgur Anjanath armor pieces or the Jin Dahaad armor set as well. The Fulgur pieces as well make it really nice for mixing Agitator with maximum might too, and so another common endgame mix set is 2 pieces of Fulgur Anjanath bonus, specifically with the helmet and the gloves, then 2 set gore magala bonus with the waist and the legs as mentioned earlier, and then you've got the chest slot to still do what you want with, which quite often will be the arkveld chest for the weakness exploit. Next up, I want to talk about Counterstrike. This skill reads as giving you increased raw attack after you get thrown off of your feet by an attack after you get knocked back, which means actually getting thrown to the ground, normally at least. The full 3 rank bonus is 25 raw attack for 45 seconds after skill activation, which is quite a hefty amount of attack and quite a long duration as well. Most players that aren't speedrunner level of skill will probably get hit at least a few times over the duration of a hunt. There's nothing wrong with that, and even at half active time, this skill would still be really quite good, but most people will have it active more often than not, like the majority of a hunt, and if you are anywhere close to 100% uptime, this skill becomes incredible. So it actually gets better the more you get hit. Not to mention that aside from actually being hit by attacks, this skill can also be activated with hyper armor animations, meaning anything that ignores the flinch of a hit but still lets you take damage from it. Stuff like the shoulder tackle hit with the greatsword will still let you activate Counterstrike while still being in your animations. Same with the sword counter on the switch axe, and same thing with the Rocksteady mantle, just sort of as a whole. Well, if you get hit while wearing the Rocksteady mantle, the effect of Counterstrike will activate, and this makes Counterstrike even better for those weapons, or if you're using Rocksteady mantle, as you can keep it active consistently without even being hit in the first place. But I'd argue it's pretty damn good for everyone even regardless of that. The generally best armor piece for Counterstrike is the Blanganga Beta Arms, which gives you 1 rank of the skill, and then 2 slots for the sockets, which can just be the rest of the ranks of Counterstrike. Otherwise, players usually build this skill through decorations and sockets, but it also shows up on some other armor sets, including some new udra pieces as well as another option. The final thing that I want to touch on as a proper skill then is Flayer. Over the last couple of weeks, a lot of testing has been done with Flayer across the player base, and for the most part, with most weapons, the overall answer is Flayer is not very good. The main reason for this is with a lot of weapons, and I'll even be putting this on the screen right now, only part of the moveset actually gets the bonus wound creation and bonus damage pops from Flayer itself, so any of the weapons where their moveset is limited with Flayer will hurt how much it gives them quite a lot. The main exceptions to this being very bad are things like Greatsword, which does not have any of these limits and does gain a lot from wound popping as a function, Sword and Shield, which can actually actively create wounds faster as a natural function of the weapon of its focus strike anyways, and Insect Glaive, which is the one where it's a little bit the most sort of divisive on because Flayer doesn't interact with Descending Slash, which is a major part of the moveset now, but also wounds have so much utility bonus to Insect Glaive, and they actually increase your damage because you can use Rising Spiral Slash more often. That said, Flayer's actual damage pops are infrequent enough to not really count as a major damage increase, and the wound generation speed increase is useful for some weapons, it is good utility, and it offers more potential iframe windows as well, but it's just not a skill that I rate all that highly when talking about offensive potency, especially with the fact that it just works poorly with most of the weapons in the game. That's all the main skills of note then for most of the general meta setups at least. Of course, people will use stuff like Heroics if you're feeling particularly fancy or dangerous, or you'll use things like Ambush if you expect a hunt to be particularly quick because it's a very strong bonus with a generally low uptime, so the shorter the duration of your hunt is in general, the better Ambush gets. But now I want to mention just a couple of other set bonuses too of relevance to get your build creating brains roaring just a little bit faster. Deshagama and Guardian Deshagama armor sets share the same set bonus, Deshagama's Might. The 2 set is plus 10 raw attack, the 4 set is plus 25 raw attack, which is pretty solid. This lasts for a whole 3-minute duration after a successful power clash or an offset. If you are using a weapon that has an offset in its moveset, once per 3 minutes is an absolutely reasonable thing to keep active, and 25 raw attack is nothing to scoff at, so this is another option for people that are using the weapons that don't get full benefit from affinity, something different than going full in on burst as a skill, essentially. It's not bad by any means, but generally speaking, once you consider the skills on the armor itself, it does end up being worse than all the stuff I've mentioned so far, at least if you care about affinity at all. Then finally, Jin Dahaad armor set bonus offers an insane potential amount of bonus raw attack on a very specific conditional activation. The 4 set bonus is plus 50 raw attack. 50, the largest of any singular bonus in the game, but it only lasts for like 60 seconds after you get webbed, getting and clearing frostbite, getting pinned, or having a power clash happen. Not a single one of these things is something that every monster in the game can do, and so it doesn't even work for all monsters, but let's say that you're going against specifically Nursilla. You can definitely purposefully get yourself webbed once per minute if it's worth 50 raw attack, right? Well, that's something to consider. It's an extremely niche interaction, it is particularly situational, and of course the cost of having to build around 4 pieces of Jin Dahaad armor will take a lot of your skill space, but that's part of the fun of banking builds in Monster Hunter, is finding those strange niche moments where something is way better than it normally would be, and abusing the hell out of that. To sort of wrap things up in a nice neat little bow, the top armor skills right now for most weapons are all affinity based, and the best ways to get the related skills are a mix of gore magala armor and either arkveld or guardian arkveld for the other slots of armor pieces. For slightly more stamina-hungry weapons, a bit of Guardian Fulgur Anjanath armor is not a bad shout by any means, and for weapons that don't care so much about affinity, Guardian Ebony Odogaron is an absolute powerhouse of an armor set, and then people will fill their final armor pieces depending on what skills best fit their playstyle. Pretty much everything else can be solved with decorations and then talismans as well, but this has been a sort of priority order of the strongest skills and the armor sets that best collect them, and also the set bonuses of course that make them better or worse or just sort of intersect with this, in an attempt to make it easier to help you put together your own builds and give you the knowledge and power to do it all for yourself, because there is a special satisfaction in doing it yourself. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and let me know any of your own thoughts in the comments down below, especially if there are any skills or armor sets that you value more than I do and think are worth having a larger conversation about. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.